Hello and welcome to another edition of Our Friend Pluto in Aquarius. Today, I'm going to be talking about Pluto moving through the houses in the sign of Aquarius. And if you've been following me for a little while, you know that my take on the planet Pluto is a little different than what most astrologers talk about. So today, I really am so excited to dive in and help you understand the gifts that Pluto is trying to bring you through the different areas of your chart. In part one of this series, I talked about Pluto more in depth, the way he elicits transformation and different things that could come up and ways to work with his energy. In part two, I talked more about Aquarius and Aquarius's ruling planets. I'll link both of those videos below if you want to check them out. Today, in this edition, what I want to talk about is I want to briefly recap some of that Pluto energy so that now you understand it more deeply and you can see the lens through which I view Pluto. You can understand the consciousness with Pluto to which I'm inviting you. And then we'll dive into the houses. I'll also talk about Pluto transiting the angles because that is a big one. And I will talk a little bit about Pluto in aspect to the nodes because for several soul groups, Pluto will be transiting either their south node or their north node. Could be happening right now or it's coming up. So I'll probably do future videos on that as well. Let's begin. Right. Pluto in Aquarius. How y'all doing with him in this energy? All this Aquarius in the background frequency is quite a shift, is it not? Again, if you're not familiar with some of the other pieces that go to this big, giant Plutonian Aquarian puzzle, I've linked a couple of videos below where I've talked about Pluto and Aquarius in more detail specifically. And I've also talked about the ending of the age of Earth, the beginning of age of air, and why we have so much Aquarian energy layered on top of one another. And I've also given a little bit of like a background context to how Pluto has moved through different generations, through the signs, including their rulers, and the different ages and social frequencies that we've been in. I know that's a lot of information, but those are linked below if you're interested in them. Today, talking about Pluto moving through the houses, the Aquarian houses in your chart. And then we'll also briefly touch on the angles and the nodes when Pluto makes contact there as well, because they're quite significant. So, astrology basics for those who are new. I have a lot of people who are either brand new to astrology or newer to astrology. So, I always like to start these videos talking about what the main pieces are, because sometimes I think it's easy to forget as an astrologer that not everybody speaks the jargon, right? Not everyone's fluent in astrologies. So, the planet. The planet is the main focus, not the sign. Now, sun sign astrology has kind of skewed our perception, right? That the signs are more important than the planets, but they're not. It's actually the planet. The planet describes the action of what is happening, and the sign tells you how that action is perceived. It is the lens through which that planet will be doing its action. The house, which is going to be our special topic today, is essentially where the action takes place. What areas, what topics of life are being covered by the planet moving through that slice, right? The slice of pie on your astrology chart, those wedges, those are the houses, and then also that sign. Now, there's something called aspects, which I haven't talked a lot about because it's such a bigger part of the astrological puzzle. And these videos would be, 4 or 5 hours long if I went into all of that. But just know that they exist. And the aspects are the conversation that takes place between the planets. And if you've ever had a conversation with another person or been part of a group project, you know that there's lots of different types of conversations, right? Interactions. Sometimes you get along, sometimes you're butting heads, sometimes you couldn't be coming from more opposite, viewpoints if you tried, and sometimes you're just in the flow, everything's going together, you're working together, right? Those are some of the basics. of the aspects. Now, as I said, astrology is complex. I know I've said this in all my videos, and I'm going to keep saying it because there are so many things happening at once, and there's many, many layers to everything. So as you're new, just take in the information that you can. Sometimes it can be a little overwhelming, but don't worry. The more you hear the terminology, the more you see it, the more you can recognize these energies in your own life, the more real it becomes and the easier it is to take in the information, right? It's just like speaking a language. Just about no one is completely fluent the first time they speak it or within a week, right? It takes time. It takes time. And then this is a big, big, big one that I'm going to mention a few times throughout this video today. Astrology describes potential. Okay, it does not guarantee outcomes. So when you're looking at any chart, this could be your natal chart, it's a map of your potential. But how you choose to view it, the culture from which you come through, the place on earth in which you live, the other people that you interact with, right? They shape and change and mold your perceptions in different ways. How you work with your own energy, how you view the different planets, that's unique and special to you. And so astrology, again, when we look at these symbols on a chart, they're showing potential. They're showing this energetic possibility. But then it's up to you how you choose to color in the lines, so to speak. My personal astrological perspective. So there's many, 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 many different types of astrology. And just like there are many types of astrology, there's also many different astrologers. And each astrologer does things a little bit differently because they're also lending their perspective to the planets based on their experiences and their knowledge and their viewpoints. So just keep that in mind when you're listening to different astrologers. My personal viewpoint blends evolutionary astrology and humanistic astrology. So if you're not familiar with those terms, evolutionary astrology focuses on the soul's evolution, primarily through Pluto and the nodes of the moon. Humanistic astrology is similar, but it's different. It doesn't focus mainly on Pluto and the nodes. It describes the totality of life in a little different way, but it's through a self-determining viewpoint. Now, why I like these so much is because I feel that they help you enhance your response ability, right? The more tools you have in your toolbox, the easier it is to do projects because you've got more things with which to tackle that particular project. So that's why I like these two perspectives the best at this moment. And I also believe that it invites you to participate in astrology because astrology is incredible and it's amazing. But if we go back to the toolbox analogy, if you've got a box full of objects and you don't know what to do with them, are they that helpful for you? Not really, right? But once you learn how to use them, oh my gosh, they're incredibly helpful. And so when you start to embody these energies, you start to see astrology and observe it in your own life, you really can experience it. That's when astrology becomes so visceral and so real and so rich and so yummy and can really enhance your life experience in beautiful ways. Astrology can also help you make connections, right? And I love helping people make connections or see things from different angles or to shine light on areas that they may not have seen before. Um, Particularly when we're talking about capabilities and kind of your superpowers and things like that. I really think more a little bit more outside the box in those kinds of ways. And I really like sharing them with people so that you have, again, more tools in your toolbox if you choose to use them. And just to remind you, there are levels of consciousness to how we work with the planetary energies or not. And so, just like I said about the different types of astrology, well, everyone's got a little different level of consciousness around astrology, around life, around their perceptions, right? And so this is also going to change how you view the planets. we're talking about something like Pluto, if your conscious perception of Pluto is that he's going to come through like a giant wrecking ball and destroy everything in your life, that's a perspective. If you can look at Pluto and understand that, yes, that may happen, but you also have tools in your toolbox and you know that you're being initiated for something greater, that's another perspective. And I don't want to put judgment on perspectives because they're all valid and they're all there for a reason. I just want to invite you to perhaps look at something a different way if that speaks to you. So, Pluto, our friend, the subject of today. Now, Pluto is representative of a number of things, but one of the big things is the energy of transformation. And I also like to remember that Pluto is the planet of hidden riches. Okay. Pluto in the Greek mythology, in the underworld, was where all the buried treasure was. And if you've ever dug for gemstones or gold or something like that, you know you got to get down and dig. They are not just typically sitting on the top of the soil, right? Occasionally they are, but really you have to go down, down, down deep into the earth and you have to work for it. And Pluto invites us into the process of alchemy, of changing things. And when we change things, when we're going to something new, when we're in the process of transformation, something old has to be left behind. In a metaphorical sense, something has to no longer exist in its form. It has to, again, metaphorically die to be reborn. Okay. And Pluto represents that kind of energy, along with Scorpio. So Pluto represents the unconscious, repressed or suppressed topics that are trying to come into our conscious awareness. And that's part of what makes Pluto so challenging is for most of us, we've worked very hard to keep aspects of ourselves or things about ourselves or stories that we may have pushed down, right? We can spend so much energy suppressing things. It's almost mind-boggling. And when Pluto comes along and really urges us to dig those things up and look at it, it's not always a comfortable process. It's a really uncomfortable, un, fuzzy experience in a lot of ways. But once those things do come in our conscious awareness, we can change them. We can do something about them. And oftentimes we find that that monster under the bed either wasn't there at all or wasn't what we thought. And that's one of the most amazing pieces about Pluto. And so when we're talking about this soul's growth, we're talking about initiation, right? Which is something that, particularly in the Western cultures, we have lost touch with. We are so intellectual and moved past some of what we may consider primitive or ancient rituals that we don't really have the same kind of relationship. But when we're going through an initiation, when we're going through a trial, challenges come up, things come up for us to face, right? It's our proverbial dragons. But once we go through the trial, that's when the transformation happens. That's when we can see the blessings in disguise. That's when we can turn the trial inside out and find the gift that's there. So Pluto also reveals to us our unconscious patterns, our need for change, which may be wanted, may be unwanted, but it could be wanted. Pluto doesn't necessarily have to be a planet of only crisis, only destruction. Okay, these can be changes that you invite, things that you want to grow past, in a sense. And Pluto also reveals to us what has stagnated, where we've stopped growing, where we've stopped evolving, right? If there's that saying, if you're not growing, you're dying, right? And that would be applicable here with Pluto. Pluto can take us from disempowerment to empowerment. And it'll show you where you're disempowered first, right? You don't just wake up and get empowerment. It's just you don't just roll out of bed and have it, right? Something has to trigger the understanding that there's disempowerment there first. Okay. We live in a 3D world, in a 3D level dimension, if you will, and we deal with polarity. We deal with opposites. It's how we know something is hot because we know something is cold. We understand the balance of the axis. Okay, so keep that in mind when you're working with Pluto in your own life. And again, Pluto can reveal that treasure or that gold, but you have to dig for it. You have to work for it. Pluto doesn't just walk up and hand you a tray full of gemstones and gold. It doesn't. You've got to do the legwork. So keep that in mind with Pluto also. So, how does Pluto elicit transformation? Well, from an evolutionary perspective, and this is more from Jeffrey Wolf Green's perspective, Jeffrey Wolf Green and Stephen Forrest, for those who are unfamiliar, were essentially the founders, if you will, of evolutionary astrology. And they have very similar but slightly different viewpoints. So, this is more the Jeffrey Wolf Green viewpoint. And he talked a lot about Pluto eliciting transformation in four major ways. So the first is the one everyone knows and loves to hate and dreads coming, which is disruptive change. It's the crisis points. It's these non-negotiable events that are beyond our control, that seem to come from our perspective from the outside. Okay. So that's one way. But there's other ways. Pluto can also help you. It can spark this need for change by encouraging you, inviting you to form a relationship to something you need and feel that you lack. This is also part of that scorpionic association with Pluto because Scorpio is about merging. It's about merging with someone or something outside of yourself so that you can accomplish greater tasks. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Pluto also can bring up a situation or potentially a crisis where you become aware of stagnation. If you think of a time in your life where maybe you were just going along, right? This happens. Sometimes we get into like a mode, an unconscious mode of we're going. We get up, we get dressed. If we have kids, we get them out the door and doing their thing. We go to work, we come home, we eat, we have some family time. Maybe we watch TV or listen to music or whatever we do, go to bed, get up, da da da, right? We can get into that pattern and something can come along with Pluto and Pluto can say, hey, excuse me, knock, knock, wake up. You're stagnating over there. You've gone unconscious. Hello, wake up. And so something will come into our attention, right? Or it could be a crisis. It could be, for example, the loss of your job, right? That the company sells or folds or your position becomes obsolete and you're sitting there thinking, how did this just happen? Right? This was not something that was wanted or whatever you feel about it. Maybe you're a little relieved on some levels. And that's something that if you dive deeper into it, you'll start to see that there was something underlying that wasn't serving you. And if you're willing to get past the space of why did this thing happen to me? Now what am I going to do? I've got bills to pay. I've got this, I've got that, kind of that way we can work ourselves into anxiety. If you can look underneath, because again, Pluto asks you to dig for things, you may find out that actually you hated that job. Right. And you've gained a lot of weight and you were really kind of grouchy and you know, you didn't like being unconscious every day and you really just were unhappy. You were okay, but you were really just not doing great. And so sometimes when that happens, it invites you to go back within and find out what you really do want to do. Or maybe it was the environment, maybe it was something else, right? But if you dig for it, you will find there's something there that's important for your evolution and your growth. And the last way that Pluto elicits change is bringing about or bringing to our awareness a situation or a crisis where you become aware of latent, meaning unconscious, right? Things that haven't blossomed yet, talents, abilities, or capabilities. So when we look at people Let's give kind of a general example. If we look at someone who maybe we would consider a hero in a crisis situation, right? They didn't know they could climb a building and pull a baby out while it was on fire. They've never done that before. That's a bit of an extreme example, but it could be something like that where they stepped up to the challenge and they find out that actually they're really brave, or they didn't even know they could climb, or they actually are really interested in going into like a first responder kind of position, or they have something there that boom, in the moment woke them up and they responded almost in an instinctive way. And they realize they have all these things to give and to share. We hear about those kinds of things a lot. Something, in a sense, dropped out of the blue, right? Came into the awareness, and people rise to the occasion. And they do it on all kinds of ways. And that can also be a Plutonian experience, especially when it transforms your life. And all of a sudden you wake up and you've got all of these things, all of these new capabilities you didn't even know were there. You were kind of just going along in your life, right? So those are the four main ways. And if you notice at the bottom, I put, or a combination of any of the above, because often these things are not working in isolation, but they're working together. So to get really to the treasure, right, we have to talk about consciousness, astrological consciousness. When I think about consciousness, I think about it as a spiral. It's been very in vogue to talk about high vibe and low vibe, and all of those things are true, right? We kind of see this ladder and it just goes up, and towards the top is good and towards the bottom is bad. Well, if we think about it more, or actually, I guess I should say less of kind of that vertical up and down, right? Where we can get into all kinds of judgment. Spiritual judgment is real, spiritual narcissism is real. But anyhow, if we're going around a spiral, it's a little different because sometimes it'll seem like we just ended back up where, boom, where we started, right? But if you look and you realize, oh, maybe I have, but I've actually gone a little higher. My consciousness is, oh, it's a little bit better now, even though I'm dealing with something, let's say, low vibe like rage or grief or depression, something like that. If it comes back around, but we can look at it in a new way, we can move out of it faster, we can see the invitation that's underneath it, then are we really low vibe? No, we've changed, right? We're evolving, and that's super, super important to keep in context, to keep remembering. So, from the evolutionary astrology perspective, there are four main states of consciousness. And again, this is according to Jeffrey Wolf Green's perspective. And the first is a de-evolved state. I'm not going to talk too much about that, but just people that are in a state of devolution, right? They're here, but they're not really here in some sense. The next level is the consensus state or the herd state. And you're probably pretty aware of this one, right? This one's probably familiar to you in some way, whether it's you, whether it's someone you know, whether it's the things you see around. There's the individuated state. That one's also pretty common. We see a lot of people moving out of the consensus. So the consensus being doing what you're told, not questioning things, wanting to just live the linear path of whatever your traditions or your culture has prescribed to you, and not really wanting to go outside of that. In the individuated state, we're moving beyond that, right? We can kind of see that, hey, wait, I don't fit in this picture. There must be something outside of this. I'm different in some way, and I want to go on the journey of finding out what that's about. So that's the individuated state. And then the final state is the spiritual state. And those are the people that are really on a journey to essentially bring God down here to earth. And we have some wonderful examples of those kinds of people when we talk about Buddha, when we talk about Jesus, when we talk about different spiritual masters throughout history and in different parts of the world. So there's a lot more people right now waking up right? We hear this term all the time, people that are wanting to get back in touch with their individuated self and their spiritual self. So just because there's these four layers, they're also not cut and dry, right? There's a lot of nuance in between them. And you could be moving from one state to another state, okay, or two states, depending on your karmic journey and what you're doing and how you're working. But just kind of keep this in mind because, you know, with all the spiritual energy that we have going on, and this has a lot to do with Neptune being in Pisces as well, outside of Pluto. But there's a lot of judgment right now on the planet, particularly around people who are in the consensus state. And just remember that however someone has incarnated, that is part of their story, and that is part of the divine, right? The one separating out into all of us, which are different expressions of the divine. And there's a reason and a place for them too. So just keep that in mind over the next 20 years, particularly. So, spiritual consciousness. So, this goes along with spiritual teachings, right? There's a spiral of conscious awareness also. And I love the way that Michael Bernard Beckwith from Agape Spiritual Center, how he talks about this. It just works for me. It may or may not for you, but I personally find this very helpful. He talks also about four stages. And the first one being the victim stage, right? This is happening to me, right? Pluto is doing these bad things to me. Mercury retrograde did this to me. Because I have Mars here, this did this to me, right? We hear this a lot in astrological conversation. So that's one, right? Another is the manifestor state. This is being done by me, right? I attracted this situation so that I could, right? The third one, channeling state. This is happening through me. This is the expression of the divine, of the field, of my higher self, whatever it is that you ascribe to personally, working through me. I am a channel, I am a vessel for this happening through me. And the last one, the being state, that this is happening as me, that there's no separation between self and God, or whatever you call God, right? So we can see this in astrology as well. I think it lends itself so perfectly and so beautifully. And there may be different subjects that you find you're in a different state on. Again, this is not static. This is not just a ladder that we climb and then, wipe our hands and we're done. This is that conscious spiraling. You can come up against a subject where you find yourself in victim state, right? Again, this is not judgment, just being aware. Oh, I have some stories around this. That's an opportunity. It's an invitation to work on them, release them, and move on from them so that you don't feel like you're being controlled by things from the outside. You feel like you are participating with life, with these divine energies. And that's a very, very, very different conscious state. So, awareness, right? Awareness is the key to our evolution. Again, it's about becoming aware of what is our self, what is our not self, right? When we're talking about the outer planets, so the outer planets include Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Okay. And of course, the trans-Newtonian objects and the Kuiper Belt object, all those kinds of things are new and coming into the discussion. I'm just not going to go into them. But if we talk mainly about the outer three planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, they often represent things that occur in our life that are outside our control. So it's very easy to fall into these states of this is happening to me. Why is this happening to me? Poor me. This always happens. It'll never be different. All of that kind of stuff. And we have all these stories around some of those energies that the planets bring to our attention. We have a lot of scripts, right? The scripts, the keys there are the always and never. Right? I can never get ahead in this area of my life. I always attract losers, right? Whatever that is, just take a moment and notice that. Put a little pin in it and start to question it. Start to ask questions. Is that really true? Where did you get that belief? Whose belief is that? Once you can start to open that up it can really start to change. You can break yourself out of these stuck places. And then again, the judgment. Judgment, man, that can be a challenging one for a lot of people, is we judge the things that happen to us as good or bad. We judge other people around us and their choices as good or bad. I know that there's anything wrong with that, but when you stay stuck there, it's you get kind of trapped in this loop, right? And if you can step outside of that for a second, then oh, again, you make space for the divine to work through you, for yourself, your higher being to come in and help transform those places so that you're not staying stuck in stories, scripts, and judgment. Why I'm bringing this up and spending time on it is because our friend Pluto, that Plutonian energy, helps dig up stories, scripts, judgments, disempowering things, things that are stagnant, stuff we've suppressed, all those kinds of things. It's going to bring them up so that it brings us conscious awareness. When we are aware of something, it's the invitation to begin to change it. And that is not something trivial. That is incredibly, incredibly powerful. Alchemy. So Pluto, turning lead into gold, right? Maybe that's a literal thing, but in a metaphoric way, if you understand that Pluto is attempting to help you, it's attempting to show you things that need to change, it's so much easier to work with Pluto. Now, this doesn't make Pluto simple. It doesn't mean that if you understand Pluto's energy, that nothing unwanted will ever happen to you ever again. It doesn't mean that. But the thing with Pluto is when we resist the changes, the impulse of things that are coming up, they don't just go away, they get louder, right? And that's true for so many topics, but it's also true for Pluto, that when we have resistance to them, we're shutting them out, la la la, don't want to see, don't want to look at, right? It just gets worse. And I can say that from experience. I tried my best to I guess, out muscle Pluto, and it didn't work. But I tried. So there we go. Um, there's another way you can work with it. You can go all in and just a change comes in and you wholeheartedly just bring it in. There's no resistance and whew, you're on your way. Okay, that's a possibility. For most of us, it's going to be a combination, right? We're going to want to make some changes and be willing to do certain things, and other parts are going to be more difficult for us to be willing to engage with. And a lot of that has to do with our own fear, right? And so Pluto can also bring up fear around things. It's hard when you're going into the dark, right? When you're in the darkness, when you're in the unknown, when what you once thought was safe and secure, a version of yourself, when it's no longer there, fear is a natural reaction. And it just depends how we continue to work with that fear. Can we keep going, or do we remain stuck, or do we devolve? Those are all things that can come up. And they're not mutually exclusive. It could be, again, a combination of those things. So why I chose the butterfly, the proverbial butterfly. Everyone talks about caterpillars turning into butterflies, and no one talks about what has to happen to the caterpillar. And when I was really in the thick of a difficult part of my Pluto transit that I've been going through for years now, since 2018, and I'm not done. I still have a few more years because that's just the way my chart is set up. I watched videos and really just had to keep watching the process of the caterpillar dissolving into essentially nothing when it's in the chrysalis, right? It ceases to be. Talk about trust, talk about faith, talk about, not knowing which way is up. And then it by the magic of life and the magic of the divine order, right, puts itself back together in this completely new form. But then it's not even done. It has to struggle to get out of its cocoon. It has to push against it so it has enough strength when it's in its new form to get out of there and to have the chance to fly and to be this whole new being, this whole new version of itself. And a lot of times we forget that. We think it's caterpillar, butterfly, right? But it's not. There's a whole period in there. That's the trials, that's the tribulation, that's that Plutonian process, that scorpionic process that will be part of some of these challenges. So if you can keep in mind, if you are going through a difficult challenge, keep in mind the caterpillar and the butterfly. You may be in the goo, you may be dissolved, you may have no idea if you're ever going to be put back together again. But if you can trust the process and keep going and keep in mind some of the principles of what Pluto is trying to help you transform in your life, it can be that anchor of hope that you need. So keeping that in mind. So Leo and Aquarius, just briefly, Pluto will activate both energies. Remember, astrology is not just 12 signs or 12 houses, but really 6 pairs of signs and houses. And so when we're talking about Leo and Aquarius, we're talking about complementary opposites. They are looking at essentially the same subjects, but from different perspectives. Okay, so Leo is the impulse for creative self-actualization. It's generous, it helps and praises others, it understands the energy of the sun. The sun just shines, the sun radiates. The sun doesn't stop shining or radiating just because someone said it was ugly or thought it was stupid, right? And again, I know I'm making a bit of a joke there, but it's true. And that's part of what Leo is learning, is to be in touch with themselves, no matter if someone's clapping or not, right? To be generous, to play, to be warm. The sun is warm, right? Aquarius, the opposite side of that is the ability to share your unique gifts and perspectives. Whatever it is about you that's outside of the box, that fits into the larger whole, that's part of Aquarius, right? When we really understand that we are interconnected, we are all part of the one in an individual piece that fits into a greater puzzle, Aquarius makes a lot more sense. And just like Leo, it takes courage to be yourself. It takes courage to stand apart. And it takes courage also to value everyone's uniqueness. Sometimes it's a lot easier to value sameness, to just want to blend in, to not want to, be weird or be different. And so that's part of what Leo and Aquarius is exploring in our chart. And when we look at the opposite sides of that, basically just invert. Take all the good stuff and invert it, right? If Leo is supposed to be generous and warm-hearted and creatively self-actualized, what's the opposite of that, right? Shut down, being a bully, being superficial, such like that. Aquarius, if Aquarius is supposed to be the impulse of freedom to be yourself, to really shine as the individual expression of the divine that you are, what's the opposite of that? Right? Conformity, shutting it down, insisting everyone has to be exactly the same. We can see a lot of this, right? We can see that shadow side coming up in our society right now. And that has a lot to do with our friend Pluto bringing that stuff up to the surface so that we can look at it and go, oh, maybe we don't want to live in a dystopian nightmare after all. Some people will choose it, and that's their choice. But for the rest of us, no, thank you, right? Because Aquarius, when Aquarius is in harmony, it's beautiful. There's authenticity and connection, right? There's the individual and the group. It's not the verses, it's together. When we understand that innovation and tradition are important, when we understand that our unique viewpoint is just as important as someone else's who we may not agree with. That's a big one there too, right? Having respect for the self, respect for others, respect for nature, respect for the divine process, really truly getting that everything is connected. right? When there's harmony there, when there's cohesion there, Aquarius is such an incredibly beautiful energy. And I really believe that Pluto can help us move towards this type of expression, move towards this new earth. The challenging sides of Aquarius, it can be a little bleak, right? There can be a great fear of standing out, right? Having to go with the crowd, succumbing to restriction or authoritarianism, um, feeling like self-agency or speaking up or having a different viewpoint is dangerous. And part of this has to do with Uranus and the collective memory, which I'll talk more about in a separate video, but we have within us these collective memories, these generational memories, if that makes more sense to you, these karmic memories, if that's something that speaks to you. And there has been such a long time period on this planet where it has been very dangerous to speak up, to go against whoever was the ruling authority, right? There's so many cases in history where that has not turned out well for the Aquarian types or the Uranian types. So there is a piece there again. We could get into judgment around things. We hear it a lot, the sheeple, for example. And not that that isn't true, not that there isn't something there, but if we can understand that we also may be holding some collective memories that we have to work through, we are being invited to bring that gunk up to the surface and move past it. We really need the truth sayers right now. We really, really need them. We need the people that are willing to have the courage to stand up to things and to show a better way, to innovate new ways. We really, really, really need that energy. And that's why it's so strong right now, not just with Pluto, but also with the Jupiter-Saturn cycle, which I've talked about in the previous two videos, that they're also in Aquarius right now. We have a 16-year overlap of Aquarian energy and of Saturn and Uranus being very, very strong, because remember, they're the rulers of Pluto because Pluto is in Aquarius. Again, I talked about that in Pluto in Aquarius part 2, which is linked. The other side of Aquarius, right? We can have this refusal to connect with other people. Nobody gets me, right? I'm weird. I'm not going to talk to anyone. I'm not going to try to get along because I'll just be misunderstood anyway. That's part of it. Or it could be the other side of it, that you think you're better than everyone. That can be a shadow Aquarius thing. Elitism. There can be this refusal of any kind of stability, of constantly needing to upheave everything, to take everything that we've ever done and basically rip it apart, tear it up, throw it away, knock the game board over, right? And that can also be challenging. If we have no stability, if there's a bunch of souls walking around who are essentially live wires and you don't know what's going to set them off, because yesterday it was one thing, today it's another, and 10 minutes from now it's going to be another thing, that's unpleasant to deal with. And I think we can see a lot of these energies already being brought up to our conscious awareness in society, right? The great parts and the not so great parts are coming up. Remember, we have to put together our head and our heart. Aquarius, mind, it's the head, heart, Leo. If we abandon one for the other, we get out of balance. So part of what Pluto is going to bring up for us is our awareness around, are we putting those two things together? Do we have heart-brain coherence? Are we moving? Are we transforming ourselves in these kinds of ways? We can talk about transformation, spiritual transformation, in a number of different ways. We can talk about it coming from above and going down the channel, right? Getting those down loads. That is one way. There's also other ways, the Kundalini types of rising up from the bottom, from the base chakra at the bottom of our spine. Yes, I know there's ones below that, but talking about the common ones here, going up, right? That's another way. Right now, one of the big invitations, in my opinion, and I'm not an expert on this subject, but this is my opinion from all the experiences that I've had and the mentors and the teachers that I've worked with, is that we are being invited to open our heart to work from the center outward. And that's not necessarily something that humanity has done in a very long time or perhaps ever. And so if we can understand that there is this energy field that comes from our heart and it radiates around us, right? That is a really powerful piece during this time. Pluto may ask you to open your heart to, in a sense, change that heart-mind connection, to break it open in some way so that it can operate differently, so that it can operate more optimally. So having an awareness of what these fields are can be very helpful over this next 20-year time period as well. When we're talking about astrology houses, I know I'm getting there. The astrology houses, this is where the action takes place. Okay, going back to the beginning of the video. If you use particular house systems, then Aquarius may look a little different in your chart. So it may be in one singular house. It may occupy more than one house. So this depends on how you divide up the sky. Just use what you prefer. If you have the situation where Aquarius is occupying more than one house in your chart, listen to both houses, okay? And see what makes sense for you, okay? And when we're talking about houses, we talked about where this action is taking place. And that could be a literal thing. That could be a literal situation, like literally your workplace, for example. But it could also be more psychological in nature. It could be more of how you are psychologically integrating workplace, environment, coworkers, bosses, if you have them, that kind of thing. I'm going to say it again because it's so important. Astrology does not guarantee outcomes. Okay, just because you read something on the internet or you hear something, or maybe even you got it, in a reading, it doesn't necessarily mean that that exact thing is 100% infallibly guaranteed to take place. It points to energetic potentials. And there's a lot of other factors that go into the potentiality of anything. Because we've got that Plutonian butterfly moment. I just want to remind you that astrology is complex, in case you hadn't picked up on that. And that everyone's chart, when you're looking at anything, when we're talking about interpretation, it's going to be general, right? The next part of this video is it's general. There's no way that I could possibly speak to every single one of your individual personal experiences, right? You have this wealth of details about you and about your chart experience that is unique to you. Okay, so keep that in mind when you're listening to or reading or taking in any kind of interpretation. Again, it doesn't mean that it's exactly going to be that way for you. Some of it may fit, some of it may not. So keep that in mind. The other piece that makes Aquarius a little bit more challenging than some of the other signs is the fact that Aquarius is unique. It tears up the rules. It does its own thing. And a lot of that also has to do with Saturn and Uranus, the ruling planets, right? And so even though something, we may traditionally think that this is going to happen, there's a great chance that Uranus could come along and be like, oh, nope. Aquarius could come along and be, oh, no. Even Saturn says no, right? Saturn may look at something and go, nope, standing apart from that. So keep that in mind when you're talking about Aquarian energy. It's a little bit more challenging than some of the other signs. So when I'm talking about the upcoming interpretations, they're general potentials for you to contemplate. Okay, take what resonates for you and leave out what doesn't. And I wrote it in pink, so I'm super, super serious about this. But I am deliberately focusing on the gifts of this transit. Okay. Yes, I know Pluto can be difficult. I am not sugarcoating things. I'm not fairy tailing things, but I feel like there's enough astrologers, books, videos, courses, whatever you want to do that focuses on Pluto's difficult, dark, unsavory, unpleasant aspects. There's enough of that. Okay. I'm deliberately focusing on the gifts, on the part right at the end, because I find it so much more helpful to know that there's a light at the end of the tunnel, to know that if there is pain and suffering and crisis, that there's something, that there's a reason for it. There's something underneath it that is valuable. And Pluto is the planet that really, really drives home that point that there's something valuable underneath. If you're willing to dig for it, if you're willing to believe it's there, if you're willing to allow it to be there. And why I have this viewpoint and why I know it works is my own experience. And, as I've mentioned earlier on in the video, I've been going through a long-term Pluto transit. I happen to have a strongly placed Pluto in my own chart. It's transited all my personal planets. And again, I'm in a deep Plutonian time. And there was a period where I really fell into a lot of anxiety and just dread around Pluto. It was like, oh my God, is this, pardon me, but is this shit ever going to end? And just day after day, I just felt so horrible. And I was really doing a number on myself because I was so focused on what Pluto was destroying or possibly going to destroy. Because that's the thing about our brains and neurologically how we're wired, because we're wired to survive, we focus on what is a potential threat when we're going through a time where our survival may actually be, you know, challenged or threatened in some way. But we can get stuck in that loop. And now everything's a threat. Everything we have to take as suspicion. Everything gets us ramped up into, the fight, flight, fawn, freeze. And that's one of the parts of Pluto that I think is very misunderstood in the way that we're not talking about the other side enough. I don't know about you, but I don't want to wake up every day and terrorize myself every day about what may or may not happen. If stuff happens, I'll deal with it. And that's what I keep reminding myself. And if things do come up, the challenge is I go, okay, what is the gift here? What's the gift? What do I need to look at that I don't want to look at? And when I started doing that, things really changed. And the moment that happened for me, I was working with one of my astrology mentors, Frank Clifford, and we weren't even talking about Pluto. We were actually talking about something else. And he brought up the Pluto transit, the Pluto square, which is a midlife transit. For those of you who don't know, it's one that just about everyone, if you live that long, you will have Pluto squaring itself, and it's a time of a lot of change and upheaval that happens in midlife. And sometimes they're stronger than other ones, just depending again on what's going on and where Pluto is placed in your consciousness and how far off your track you are, how much course correction you need. Um, anyway, I was really just in the middle of feeling just horrible. And he said to me, oh, you're going through your Pluto square. Yes. And immediately just, all the stuff coming up. Oh, Pluto did this. It took this. It was this betrayal, that betrayal, all of this stuff just sitting there. And he said to me, do you feel more empowered now? And I stopped. And there was this, sorry, I'm actually on the precipice of tears here right now, but just recalling that relief, the moment where all of that stopped and I had peace. It was like time stopped. And all of a sudden I had space. And all of those things that had been tormenting me, literally like day in, day out. And I know better, doing astrology, I know better, but having that experience, it completely changed how I looked at Pluto and looked at the things that were going on. And I went, I do feel more empowered because it was true. I actually did. That was one of the biggest gifts that I was given from that transit was seeing all the places where I was stuck in disempowerment, and other people and other situations were reflecting that back to me. And it took more than one. It took a few. I was being a little obtuse about it. So Anyhow, that completely changed my life. And that was several years ago. And the amount of truly wonderful Plutonian gifts that I have been able to dig up, the treasure that I have found has profoundly changed my life in ways that I never would have thought possible. And again, I look at astrology, I'm an evolutionary astrologer, and that moment changed everything. And so when I talk about the houses going forward, that's the place from which I am coming. I want to show you what the gifts are so that you have the opportunity for that space, for that peace to invite the gifts in. All right, so let's look at the houses. All right, kicking things off with the first house. So you are a soul that incarnated with Pluto transiting the first house in Aquarius. And the first house, you're also going to want to look at your ascendant as well, because it will be contained somewhere in that first house. So you've had Pluto going through the 12th house in Capricorn, really reshaping your life, your perceptions, everything underneath, behind the curtains, so to speak, for the last 15-ish years. And now it's time to come back out. Pluto crossing that ascendant, whether it will or it has already. This is an invitation to transform the self, because the first house, in a general way, speaks of how we meet the world, what other people's first impressions are of us. It has to do with our physical body. The vehicle in which we navigate the world is represented by that first house and that ascendant. This is how we steer our life. This has to do with early messaging that we received about how we're supposed to be or how life is supposed to be. And so when Pluto comes along through here, there is an invitation to transform the self inwardly and outwardly. So you may find that over the next 20-year period, you become radically different in some way, become more authentic. You have the opportunity to let go of anything that is not self, not you, right? You get to do a remodel, if you like, of your approach to life, how you view life, how you perceive things, and you have the opportunity to let go of things that are limiting. Okay. This can help you change how you perceive not only yourself, but your relationships with others. How you relate to others may alter in some way. The invitation optimally is to make that a healthier interconnection, right? Because the first house is self and the seventh house is the other, right? It's that mirroring principle. Just like that picture up in the top right corner, right? Of that individual kind of, in a sense, drawing themselves in. We see ourselves oftentimes through the eyes of others in some way. If we're opening up to it, if we're allowing that reflection to come back in, and that can profoundly change your inner landscape, because you can invite back in fragments of yourself that perhaps were unconscious or that you disowned in some way. And these can be really good. These can be really beautiful things. You'll have Leo over there on that seventh house. Maybe, inviting back in that inner child or that sense of play or that sense of generosity into yourself in a new way. This can also help find your tribe. Who's your tribe now? Right? You just went through 15 years of Pluto transforming that 12th house. You're coming back over that ascendant and that first house and going, I am a new me. So, who's your tribe now? Who are the people that get you? Aquarius and Leo have so much to do about finding the right audience, finding the right tribe, because the people that get your vibe and celebrate you, those are the ones that you want to bring more into the fold. The ones who don't get you, that's fine, right? It's cool by the pool. Let them live their own life, but don't feel like you have to only be with people who don't get you. right? There's so many other people that are looking for your special genius, and that will celebrate you. And the other piece here is exploring again that mind-body connection. Aquarius has to do with mind, right? It's what we know or what we think we know. And going beyond that, when we're talking about the first house, we're also talking about the physical being. So exploring how those two things are related and hopefully making an even healthier connection to those two areas. Pluto in Aquarius in that second house. So you are a soul who came in with Aquarius on their second house, and you are alive during this time of Pluto transiting the second house of how we support ourselves. How do we do that? Well, it's through our talents, our capacities, our resources, right? It's the house of what we possess. It describes our earning potential, describes what we find valuable and what we enjoy. Remember, this is Taurus's house. So this is a Venus house. This is about magnetizing things. And it describes our worth in some way, our relationship to our worth in some way. And so don't freak out with Pluto going through your second house. It can be a challenging one when we talk about it being the house of wealth or resources or money, right? But the opportunity is to discover new wealth, to dig deep and find new prosperity. With the picture that I chose at the top, that bowl full of colored stones, right? You could look at that and say, well, that's just a bowl of junk. Maybe that's a viewpoint. But it could also have potential. What is the potential there? What could you turn that into? What could you put your own personal stamp on so that other people see what you have to offer as valuable? Because you believe in it in yourself. You understand that in yourself, right? So Pluto here also changing how you view your resources. You may discover things you never knew you had, or you may want to change how you work with resources in some way. Maybe it will pull you into a new area of life or a new way to exchange, right? Because really, money in a sense is arbitrary, but what we're talking about is we're talking about currency. We're talking about exchanging that, right? What does that mean for you now? What ways can you be innovative there? How can you examine your motivations around what makes you feel secure, right? Exploring the mind, exploring your beliefs around value of all things, yourself included. What is the value there? How can you open up your perceptions and look at things in a new way? Again, innovation. That's a big one with Aquarius, right? With that Saturn and that Uranus energy underneath there, innovating how you use your resources and how you share them with others. We are on the precipice of changing so many things right now. As of today in 2024, Uranus is in Taurus. So, looking for how we work with resources, that's been up for change since 2018. And so, you may really be on this cutting edge of discovering something new for yourself or potentially other people that opens up new possibilities. This will also have to do with evolving likes and dislikes and what you enjoy. Again, who are you now? After 15 years of Pluto and Capricorn going through that first house and really, remodeling yourself. Now what? Now what do you want to build on that? The second house is a building house. It takes what the first house starts and builds it, right? Sustains it, brings it up. And so, what reflects you now? Dive into that. Go in there, see what treasure is there. And then the last piece here that I want to touch on is authentic love and appreciation of yourself in some new way, because not always, but often Aquarius can represent parts of us that we were told we're not acceptable or we're not okay or we're rejected in some way. And there can be this piece of there's part of me that doesn't fit in, or there's part of me that will always be unlovable, right? I can't be my full self because of X or Y or Z or A or B or whatever, right? Bringing that back in and understanding that it's okay to have all of the pieces of yourself and to really be able to tap into them and let them be the things that build your foundation. Let yourself be your greatest asset and your most secure base from which to operate by bringing in parts of yourself that may have been fragmented in some way. The third house, Pluto in Aquarius. So your soul has decided that Pluto transiting this third house would bring you benefits during this time in your life. So the third house has to do with your local environment, taking short journeys, right? So short journeys. I think of this now with our global society, this has changed quite a bit, but I think about it as like if I hopped on my beach cruiser and rode around town, right? That would be a short journey, something like that. But we're also talking about making connections. This is Gemini's house. So you've got an air sign in an air house, which is nice. There's a nice affinity here to making connections, to communicating, to writing or speaking, or even the internet in some way has to do with Aquarius. And this kind of Mercury Gemini is how we are able to communicate with other people who can help us enhance our own visionary ideas. And the third house also has to do with our relationships with our siblings, if you have any. So in the third house, Pluto really helping you to find your authentic voice and be able to share that in a new way with others. What is your communication style? It doesn't have to be written. It could be through pottery. It could be through chemistry. It could be through giving tours. It could be so many different things, right? So what is that? What is your communication style now? Where is your tribe? Because you're going to want to find the people with whom you can mix, right? Like-minded people who can share and expand your vision and you can bounce ideas off of and you can make changes together. So this is a really great time for finding who those people are. Pluto went through that second house, right? That second house of self, the value of self, what you possess. Did a lot of changes there. And at this point, there's, in a sense, a new you. Go share that with other people. Find the tribes of people that light you up and that value what you have to say. This is also a time of choosing environments that may help you heal in some way of those early childhood messages that you may have received where it wasn't okay to be yourself, the things that you said were weird, or what you were into, what you liked, the way you learned perhaps was rejected in some way. Bringing those things back in and finding the people who recognize what you have to give. It's going to be a very, very healing time period around the subjects of rejection or not belonging, changing those stories, changing those messages. This is also a beautiful time of mental acuity. Really, Pluto likes to dig, right? Pluto wants to dig deep. And so you may find that your mind is very active and wants to dig into things, wants to find new subjects, right? Which it kind of like sink its shovel into and extract these new ideas. So this could be a great time for learning. It could be a great time for teaching or probing or investigation. Just be aware of, getting stuck in that loop of like have to dig, have to dig, have to dig, right? There's a point where you can stop. You can take a break. You don't have to, dig to the core of the earth and beyond. You could, but you don't have to. Because you really want to be mindful of where your attention goes. What are you paying attention to? What are you exchanging your energy, your life force, your vital resources for? What are you taking in? Right? Just be mindful of that during this time period, because if it's taking away from your energy or overly creating anxiety or radicalization or things like that, just pause and take a look and say, is that a path I want to continue on? What is here for me that perhaps I could let go of? Third house. I'm excited for you guys. I think that's going to be a really beautiful time period for all of you third house Aquarius souls. All right, Aquarius in the fourth house. So you are a soul that chose to have Aquarius placed in that fourth house and be alive during the time of Pluto moving through this house. And this is a deep house. This is Cancer's house. And this house has to do with our inner security, our sense of privacy, and our sense of sanctuary. It's about what feels like home. And that could be literal, that could be more metaphorical. This also has to do with our roots, our family, our generational inheritance, right? Where we came from. This is representative of our foundation. And the fourth house also represents the end of the matter or the bottom of the matter, getting to the bottom of things, right? Because it's part of the bottom part of the chart. It's around the time approximately of midnight-ish, okay? For most charts, not all. So Pluto coming through Cancer's house, this can be a little bit of a sensitive area. But some of the gifts here are liberation from early messaging or conditioning or traditions that reflect your not self. Okay, this can be the alchemy, right? The transmutation of early experiences that you may have been suppressing. And if this is something very deep, then, get additional help and tools and resources. Okay. This can also represent changes in home. So that could be literal. It could be something fun, like you're able to redecorate or remodel, or maybe you're in the process of you've had a big house and now you don't want that. You want something smaller so you can travel or whatever it is, right? There could be a change there so that this new you, this sanctuary that you're in reflects who you are now. What do you want now? Where is home? You may have lived in the same place for a long time and now are feeling the urge to perhaps move somewhere else, or you feel more of an affinity now. Where are you now? This can also be a time of regeneration, because remember, Pluto also represents regeneration. And this can be around the topics of yourself, right? Your emotional self. This can be your home in some literal way, or family ties. And this can include, especially with Aquarius here, your chosen family. So this may be DNA family, this may be chosen family. There could be something here about regenerating that, or allowing for things to transform in some way. And so they feel more aligned, or they feel more alive, or they feel more vital at the end of this period. There's a beautiful opportunity here to let go of the past, to heal the past in some way. And when you're able to do that, that can really help find authenticity through emotional security, right? And vice versa. Fourth house has to do also with our emotional awareness, our emotional security, where we have perhaps ambitions that we keep, that we want to protect, but nonetheless want to see to maturity. So this could be around those kinds of subjects also. You could find a newfound freedom in your private life. Maybe you've been very public in some way, or maybe you're going to be drawn into things that require you to be more in the public sphere with Leo up on that 10th house. And so Maybe what's happening here is that your home becomes this newfound place of sanctuary, and you just really feel like you can regenerate yourself there. You really feel the sense of freedom in your home time, in perhaps family time, something of that nature. And for those of you that this is applicable, the fourth house also has to do with retirement. And so, if you're in the retirement phase of your life, this could be something that liberates you to maybe you feel more authentic now. Maybe you've spent a really long time, working and striving for things and clocking in and clocking out and being diligent, particularly with that age of Earth that we lived in for so long. And maybe now it's time to have some fun, meet new people, have new experiences. Perhaps you had to wear, a uniform to work every day, and that's really not you. And now you can just kind of let it all fly and take up kite surfing or whatever it is that speaks to you, and to be able to maybe tap into things that you couldn't for whatever reason for a long period of your life. So the fourth house, getting in touch with the things that really bring you emotional joy and security in some way. The fifth house, this is Leo's house. So Pluto in Aquarius moving through this fifth house. This is where we want to shine and be seen. The fifth house has to do with our creative actualization. And this could be creativity in a project, perhaps it's an artistic way. This could also be procreation. And this is why this house also has to do with children, if that's relevant for you. But this could also represent your inner child, right? The fifth house, this house represents, in my view, our inner heart, the things that we keep that are really essentially us, this playful side of us, right? The fifth house, the house of fun. It's the house of leisure and pleasure and play and hobbies and love affairs, right? Romance, things like that. Taking risks. Leo has to take some risks. So does Aquarius, right? There's a risk in being seen for who you are. There's the risk of rejection. There's a risk that people may not get you. But there's also a beautiful reward of just letting yourself shine anyway. Remember, this is the sun's house. So the sun is going to give of itself unconditionally, in a sense, right? No matter who's clapping or not. How many people wake up every day and say thank you to the sun rising? Not enough. Not enough, right? So, but it's okay. The sun shines anyway. And so when we're talking about the fifth house, we're talking about healthy expression and relationship to your unique self-expression and contribution. Pluto giving the opportunity to heal anything from the past, or maybe that has happened around feeling rejection or feeling like you can't be yourself in some way. That may be relevant for some of you. And this is, again, about finding the right audience. So important to this fifth house, but also to Aquarius as well. Finding the right audience that celebrates your unique visions. Who are the people that see your genius? Who are the people that don't? It's okay that people don't, but look for the people who do. Look for the projects that light you up. Maybe you can find inspiration through new creative endeavors. And creative, again, it could be something to do with fifth house, also has to do sometimes with things like singing or theater or dancing or music, stuff like that. Maybe there's an expression there. Maybe you take back up um, singing or dancing or start playing music in your house, right? Something just to help you get those Aquarian juices going. This can also be things that you put out in the world that are of service to others, that awaken other people, that are helping transform society in some way. There's this really beautiful synergy between this house really giving of itself and the what's the way I want to say this? It's when you give of your unique gifts that really inspires other people to do the same, right? So we're talking about transformation here, and one of the ways could be transformation through romantic pursuits. So that may or may not be applicable for you, but romance, you know, doesn't just have to be love affairs. Romance can be a lot of different things. Maybe it's, being romantic to yourself, or maybe you do have a partner and maybe things have kind of, you know, changed in some way, and we can bring back some more authentic expression to bring back a little bit more sizzle into a particular relationship if we have one. If we don't, this could be a time of finding new people, looking for people who really get you, who are not intimidated or don't think that, who you really are is strange in some way and you have to in some way dampen that down. Like, no, there'll be someone who loves you for you, right? And romantic pursuits could also be, again, things like poetry or music or some kind of expression in another way. It doesn't have to be with an intimate partner, although it could be. We also, here in this house, talk about children. So if this is applicable for you, there could be some kind of morphosis through children. Perhaps you're thinking about starting a family during this period. Perhaps that's applicable for you. Well, that in itself is a huge transformation, right? And a huge adventure that you will go on. Perhaps it could be being inspired by your children. Maybe there's something that you see your child experiencing or going through, or that they're interested in, and that sparks your creative impulse to say, "Ah, I got it. I got the idea for the next thing that you want to work on." So those are all beautiful possibilities. And of course, this doesn't have to be literal children. It could be the child inside, like getting back in touch with having fun. You need to have fun with this fifth house Aquarius. It's really, really, really important. It's important for all of us, right? But during this time period, it's going to be emphasized for you. And the last piece that I want to talk about with this house, I could talk about this house for a really long time, but I'll keep it short. Rediscovering the heart-mind connection. I talked about this previously if you watched the beginning of this video. The mind Aquarius, the heart Leo. What's the connection there, right? How can you bring those things into coherence so that they're not, in essence, like pulling against one another, but how can they come together? Because when they do come together, it's magical, right? And you're going to find these things through pursuits that bring you joy. So look for things that bring you joy. And these may be new things. This may be a transformation. You may find a loss of joy for a while. Just, allow that to be there and look for something else. Try new things. See what happens. But definitely things that bring you joy coming up here. All right, my sixth house souls incarnating in this life with Aquarius on that sixth house, having Pluto transiting through the sixth house. So the sixth house is a really important house. It's a complex house. Many of the houses are complex, but I would say the sixth house has a little extra complexity to it. This is Virgo's house. And Virgo has to do with integration, amongst other things, and about being able to analyze and separate what do we want to keep and what do we want to let go of. The sixth house has to do with our day-to-day affairs, our routines, and our rituals. It speaks to our health. And of course, that is an entirely specialized big subject in and of itself. So there are branches of medical astrology if that's something that is attractive to you. But talking about the health here in this context, about the mind-body connection. Mercury rules over that sixth house. So we have the mind. Aquarius also has to do with the mind. And Aquarius and Mercury both, in a way, have to do with the nervous system. So really paying attention to what's going on in the physical body. How is the relationship between the mind and the physical body? How is that relationship? Okay, paying attention to that during this time period. The sixth house also talks about our working environment. Okay. And this doesn't have to be work. This could describe, for those of you who are in school, it could describe a little bit of that because that's part of your day-to-day routine. It could also describe places where perhaps you volunteer or do work that is outside of your home. Okay. So this could be a career, it could be a literal job, but it's really things that are outside of the home in some way. So when we're talking about the sixth house, we also are talking about unequal partnerships. And what does that mean? Well, this could be something like a student-teacher relationship or a boss-employee relationship, something of that kind of nature, where there's, in essence, a hierarchy of some kind. This house has to do with the connection to service and to animals, particularly our pets, right? Or our pet projects, as the saying goes. This is the house where we really hone our skills and our crafts and our technical skills, the things that we can do over and over again, trying to achieve a level of perfection, right? Aquarius has also to do, Uranus, one of its ruling planets, has to do with perfection, in addition to our beautiful Virgos in that sixth house. So again, when we're talking about sixth house, there is an emphasis on your mind, body wellness. Do not ignore your mind, body wellness. This could be a time of great regeneration in some way, or creating new relationships to how the mind and the body are working together or not. As I've been stressing, prioritizing your wellness during this time period and understanding underlying motivations or beliefs that affect your wellness. Okay. This could be a time of changing routines or your day-to-day activities so that they are in alignment with who you are now, right? You would have had Pluto and Capricorn going through that fifth house, changing what you find is fun, what's attractive to you, what has been going on in that creative self-actualization period of Pluto coming through and making some changes there. Well, now, how is that changing your day-to-day routine? Does your day-to-day life reflect who you really are? This could include transformations in work or your workplace in some way. So, when talking about the workplace, there is the opportunity to understand right use of power in the workplace. Okay, that might be a topic that comes up. And there could also be opportunities here for transformation and metamorphosis through volunteer work, through acts of service, right? Or maybe this is a time period of working with animals more in some way, because in the sixth house does have to do with animals, particularly our pets. So maybe this is a time period of getting a pet and really having that as part of your daily routine and your wellness. The seventh house. All right, the seventh house is where we encounter the other. Okay, the first house is the house of self. It's the subjective house. Going all the way through the sixth house, all of these are more self-focused, more subjective focused. And the seventh house is where we begin to meet other people, right? So we're talking about the other. It could be a relationship that is intimate in nature or romantic in nature. That's possible. But it's also possible that we're talking about our business partnerships, right? Things that are contractual or contracts in general. We're talking in this house about equal partnerships. In the sixth house, we talk about unequal partnerships, right? We're looking for integration of the self, getting prepared to meet the other person on an equal basis in the seventh house. So this house also describes what we would term open enemies or people with whom we do not get along. Okay, that's also possible within the seventh house. And the seventh house also reflects to us the not self. It's where we project. It's dynamics of ourself that are not fully conscious or potentially integrated into ourselves that get mirrored through our relationships. It's that saying of whatever you see in another is also in you. And that doesn't have to be negative. That could be very positive. But in the seventh house, through our relationships, that's where we find our mirrors. That's where things get reflected back to us. And Pluto coming through here, really bringing up some changes and transformation in our dealings, in our encounters, in the way we interact with the other. Okay, so having Aquarius on that seventh house, part of this is the balance, right, of needing freedom and needing connection. And so during this time period, relationships could really be catalysts for transformation. With relationships and transformation, there's something here about, again, inviting back parts of the self that maybe you thought you couldn't share with another person. This is about meeting someone with your authenticity, because if your authenticity isn't showing for whatever reason, are you really meeting that other person in an equal way? If parts of yourself you're suppressing, right? Do you see what I'm getting at there? So there's a great opportunity here to liberate yourself from that kind of burden, and also to liberate yourself from projections. Remember what I said about if you see something in another, it's also in you. So that could be a positive revelation. It could be a unwanted revelation, but inviting those things back in, making them conscious so that you can transform them will be really important through relationship. Investigation, right? Into what parts of yourself have you disowned? What parts of yourself have not been invited back into the fold? Really taking a look at those during this time period so that you don't have to feel this fragmentation, or you don't have to feel this incompleteness looking for someone else. It's probably subconscious, right? It might be conscious, but most likely it's subconscious, trying to fill in a need for you, right? Or not looking at something, I don't want to say this. It's like having a part of ourself that is unwanted or unsavory or unpleasant, and putting that out on the other person instead of dealing with it ourselves. So that's something that can come up in the seventh house. And it's a great time to heal that and move past it. Because ultimately, you want to liberate yourself from partnership dynamics that are deeply conditioned, that reflect your not self in some way. This is a beautiful, beautiful time for transformation of all kinds in partnership. There could be phoenix-like cycles in existing relationships. And what do I mean by that? Well, there could be time period where things, in a sense, go through a metaphoric turning to ash and then being reborn. That's also possible during this time. Breaking free of power struggles in relationship. So that's a gift of this Pluto in the seventh house. And then you could also form alliances that are powerful in nature. So remember, Pluto is not all bad. Pluto can invite us to find things that we need so that we can learn new skills, take them in. As long as we integrate them into ourselves, that's the key piece here, not just depending on the other person to do it for us, but to really take that in and integrate it. It can be a beautiful and powerful time of new alliances as well. The eighth house, Pluto, moving through Aquarius in the eighth house. So this is a really particularly complex house. And I could talk for hours about the eighth house and why a soul might choose to have Aquarius here. And in essence, similarly to the seventh house, this has to do with healing through relationship, parts of self that may have been disowned, parts of self where you feel like you can't be yourself or speak the way you want to or reveal something because of the fear of rejection. And that could come from early life messaging, from experiences. That could come from generational memory or karmic memories, depending on how you view karma. And in this house, we have Pluto essentially coming to his home base. So Pluto's comfortable here in a lot of ways. And we have also this layering of an air house on a water house, the need for deep intimacy, but also freedom, the need to deeply merge and be intimate with something outside of the self, but also the need to maintain separateness. And it's a bit of a paradox. These are definitely complementary opposites here in this house. So when we're talking about the eighth house, amongst other things, we are talking about the house of transformation, of transmutation, of alchemy, of regeneration. This house also talks about psychological subjects, esoteric subjects, things that are considered taboo, things that are occult. Occult means hidden. This has to do with other people's assets and resources. When we talk about the second house, right, it was the things that we ourselves have. In the eighth house, it's the invitation to work with other people's resources. Why? Well, Taurus, that second house, our individual self, can only get so far. At a certain point, we need other people, whether it's their skills, whether it's their assets, whether it's their viewpoint, whether it's literally another pair of hands to help, right? We need that at a certain point. And that's part of what the eighth house deals with. So, in essence, it's really about what is shared. It's about what we merge together and what is in union. This does have a lot to do with intimacy. It has to do with secrets. It has to do with your private life. Okay. Again, this is a very complex house, so I may end up doing other videos on it. We shall see. But in any case, we're talking about the need for liberation from psychological shackles that you have picked up from other people or early life experiences. What do I mean by picked up from other people? Well, the eighth house and that scorpionic energy, that water house energy, all the water signs are very feeling, very empathetic. Water, right, can pull things in a sense, we can absorb and pick up other people's energies without realizing it. And so with Aquarius here, there's this beautiful invitation to free yourself from things that are not you. So it'll be really important to look at either messaging that you received or energies that you may have picked up from other people or early life experiences that in some way do not reflect who you are. Okay, so this will be a beautiful invitation during this time. Another thing that could come up with this eighth house transit is innovations in how you work with other people and their resources, right? How do you integrate self and other self resources and other people's resources? How do you do that? And how do you want to do that now that Pluto has gone through your seventh house for 15 years and transformed the way you work in one-on-one partnerships? How do you do it now? Right? Innovation, in a sense, is natural if you think about it in that way. And we're talking again about balancing love and freedom, balancing merging of self while also maintaining self. The balance here is really, really important to this house with Aquarius. Transformation of relationship dynamics absolutely will be one of the topics here. So, again, breaking free of perhaps the fear of intimacy as well. Like if you really open up and are vulnerable, Aquarius doesn't necessarily like to be vulnerable. There's a fear that if you do that, right, there is going to be some kind of rejection or betrayal or something like that. There can be a fear there. And that's true really for anyone. But with this Aquarius on the eighth house, there's something here where in the past that hasn't gone well for you. And so there's a need. Maybe what really happened is you found out what happens when you share with the wrong people, right? Because the eighth house, there is this desire to bond. Aquarius, in some ways, one of the other sides of Aquarius, let me say it that way, is not wanting to stand out, not wanting to be different, right? There could be this desire to conform. Okay. So there could have been something here where you feel like you have to conform to your other person, right? Whether that's intimate in nature, whether that's a business partnership, that there's something there where the lines got a little funky and something happened there. And so this can be a really beautiful time of healing those kinds of dynamics, healing perhaps fear around these dynamics because you've learned so much, because you understand the importance of finding who is the right tribe to share yourself with and who isn't. Because there's a lot of people that aren't, right? There's not everyone you need to open up and share your most intimate parts with. So I think you've really been working on that for a long time. And this can be a beautiful time of integrating. Recovering the ability to share your uniqueness. Because again, for some people, there has been a time of rejection or betrayal or sharing your vulnerability with the wrong people. Okay. And so recovering that ability to be yourself and hold yourself and the ability to recognize who are the right people to share this with. This could also be a time of transformation and regeneration around shared resources. Okay, perhaps an inheritance of some kind as well. And we're also talking about healing and integrating the radical, rebellious, and weird parts of yourself that you may have been suppressing. Like they want to come out now. And that's great. And let it come out, and that piece there that can be challenging is the need to let it out, but also not how do I say this? Not shocking your partners because it just feels so good to let it out and you kind of are like over expressing, right? Shocking people just because there's that need to move all that energy. Find a place where you can channel it that maybe you're not overdoing it, right? So healing that though, figuring out again that balance of all this tremendous energy that gets channeled and really wants to channel through other people, which is a beautiful, beautiful thing. Having a lot of, again, healing and transformation in that area for my beautiful eighth house Aquarius souls. The ninth house, Pluto in Aquarius. The ninth house has to do with beliefs, amongst other things, but it's beliefs. It's faith, it's higher education. What do I mean by education? Education that goes beyond your early years, your young years, so things that are outside of that realm. It has to do with philosophies, theosophies, right? Religiosities, broader viewpoints, people, cultures, ideas that are foreign, that are different to your own, or potentially far away. We're talking about long distance travel here. So long distance travel, right? I can't just hop on my bike, on my beach cruiser, like I could in the third house and arrive at my destination. I'm going to need to get in a car or a train or a plane, something like that. Okay. Searching for meaning, symbols. The ninth house has to do with symbology as well. And that goes along with the search for meaning. This is also the house potentially of publishing our stories, getting them out for people to learn from. This is also the house of teaching, of mentoring, right? And publishing can be part of that as well. We're talking about ethics. We're talking about laws, both natural laws, spiritual laws, social laws, laws in many different forms. We're talking about spiritual truth. Okay. Talking about spiritual truth in the ninth house. So when we're talking about Pluto here, a soul that has chosen to have Aquarius here, looking for transformation of outdated, not self or conditioned beliefs. Questioning, where do your beliefs come from? Why do you think that way? Or why does another person think that way? There's that open-mindedness here, that need to investigate other people's viewpoints, including your own, and perhaps their origins. Where do they come from? Seeking like-minded souls who expand your worldview. And this, in so many ways, right now has become easier with the internet, with Zoom, with YouTube, with this global society. It's easier to find people in faraway places, to learn from them, to get their viewpoint, to be able to connect. So even if you can't get on a plane or a train and hop around the world, there's another way to do it right now, which is pretty incredible. It's a pretty, for all of its shortcomings, the internet is truly amazing and has absolutely changed humanity in many ways, both good and not good. But seeking out new people so you can expand your worldview, expand your philosophy, your beliefs, learn from others, right? And then again, liberation from ideas, dogmas, philosophies, whatever it is that are stifling, that are rigid, that are outworn, that maybe don't reflect who you actually are, but you've been carrying them around for some other reason. Looking at innovations in teaching, in mentoring, in guiding, right? Now, this doesn't mean that you have to actually become a teacher, but maybe it's, that you're finding yourself becoming almost like maybe the guide of your friend group or something like that during this time period, because you have so much knowledge and so many things to share with Aquarius here on that ninth house. This is a lot of mind, right? It's that air on that firehouse, really wanting to get that stimulation through yourself and other people. Metamorphose this through engaging with people from different backgrounds and cultures and places. This is a big need here, particularly with Aquarius, because we're talking about people with whom we form alliances, our groups, our tribes, the people that share our ideals, kind of in a sense like double emphasized in the ninth house. Breaking free of society's beliefs, right? So whatever society it is that you currently find yourself in and their rules and their beliefs, it may be time to shake some of those off, right? Dust them off, get some new ones. There's the need for the cultivation of your own personal, authentic philosophy at this time period. And what does that mean? And how has it changed, particularly after Pluto going through that eighth house? Done a lot of changes with whom you have been relating, right? In a very deep way. And when we're talking about Aquarius in that ninth house, there's going to be this need to learn outside of the box, to learn outside of convention, to do something in a new way, to find transformation through being able to engage with that which is not the day to day, not the average. So really exciting. I love that ninth house, Aquarius, for all you souls. The 10th house, Pluto in Aquarius. So we're talking about our place in society. We're talking about social recognition and achievements, our professions. Now, this could be, again, a career. Often with the 10th house, it gets kind of pigeonholed into career. But in a broader sense, professions have to do with who we profess ourselves to be, right? This has to do with what we look up to, what we aspire to. It's our inner authority. It's that cultivation of all the experiences of all the houses that come before, especially coming out of that ninth house, where we have been working through our belief systems and what we have been learning. Now, how do we hold that within and operate from there? This has to do with long-term goals and also our legacy. What do we want to leave that is bigger than us, that potentially could stand through time longer than we will be physically incarnated? So when we're talking about this, we're talking about the desire to make unique and impactful contributions, particularly with Aquarius here, right? Aquarius wants to be bigger than self. That's why it has to do with groups. And in the 10th house, it's wanting to make a contribution. Do you see how this all goes together? We're talking about liberation from social images, from conditioning, from careers or goals that are part of the not self. Okay. Or perhaps were projected upon you through early experiences, perhaps familial expectations or cultural expectations or something of that nature. With Pluto going through that ninth house, again, changing your worldview and your beliefs, there's a need to integrate now what those new things are, what that authentic reflection is into your profession. Again, that could be your career, but also just who you profess yourself to be and your legacy. What are you working on? What's the contribution that you're making? How has it changed now? This has to do with the evolutionary journey of finding your place in the collective. Right? And the 10th house is also living a life where our inner authentic beliefs are in congruence with our outer actions. It's a lot also about understanding the right leadership, power dynamics, right? Because sometimes when Pluto is transiting a house like this, there can be the temptation to get into power struggles subconsciously. This is not necessarily something that's on the surface, but it's to explore the underworld in some way. And this doesn't, maybe it's not you, maybe it's coming through other people, but to explore that underworld in some way of what is wrong use of authority and power so that you can understand what the right uses are. Again, so that you can make these meaningful, big contributions that you want to make with Aquarius being in that 10th house. The 11th house. So Pluto going through Aquarius, and Aquarius is home base of that 11th house. And the 11th house is a bit of a complex house as well. It covers a lot of area. But in general, what it's looking at is our alliances, our groups, our teams, right? Organizations that we belong to and feel an affinity with. It's our friendships. It has to do with our hopes and our dreams and our visions of the future. Remember, Aquarius is a visionary sign. It's always looking ahead, right? This is where we want to make contributions to the collective. This is causes and humanitarian efforts and social concerns. This has to do also with the desire to be a part of something bigger than the self, right? To contribute to something larger than self, right? It's the group. It's the mentality of the group, of the bigger than my little self, my one self, right? And it has to do with interconnection as a result. So Pluto over here, exploring group dynamics and finding the right group that recognizes your genius. So sometimes when we've got Aquarius here, there can be early experiences of not fitting in some way or being rejected in some way or not having your viewpoint appreciated, looking at things through a different lens in a way where other people in your early experiences, they don't get it. And so you may have shelved some of the things that are now going to be coming back up for you to bring forward because it's time, right? Especially with Pluto having gone through that 10th house for 15 years. Wow, I mean, really changing your contribution to society, going through, potentially power struggles in your career, your profession, or your social image. Coming on the other side of that now, who do you want to be in the group? How do you want to contribute to the group? Who are the right people? What is the right use of potentially leadership, if that applies to you, if you have particular planets in this house? How does that work? What kind of leadership are you looking for, or do you want to be? Right? There's lots of things we could talk about with that, but in any case, we're talking about transformed goals and wishes for your future. What do you want to do now? Who are you now? What does the future look like for you now? Right? We're talking about metamorphosis through collective associations and endeavors, change through integration, through interconnection, through experiences of things that are larger than you. So this may be new tribes, right? Finding new tribes that get your vibe. This is a theme for several of the houses because it has to do with Aquarius, really. We're talking about liberation and associations from causes or efforts or groups or things like that that are no longer authentically aligned. So there may have been things that you've been associated with for a long time that for whatever reason just don't fit with your worldview anymore. So liberating yourself from those things and finding the things that do speak to you. We're talking about healing residual trauma, right? About being left out or rejected from groups. So I kind of touched upon that when I was talking about the 11th house in general, but depending on what planets you have here as well, this may or may not apply to you, but there's often this sense of being on the outside of the group in some way. Even if you're in groups, it doesn't mean that you were a loner for a lot of your life or any part of your life. You could have always been very socially minded, very socially integrated. But for some, there'll be this piece of like, I was with the group, but not in the group, right? Does that make sense? For whoever that makes sense for. I will trust that it landed. So we're also talking about liberation from self-centeredness to interconnectedness. What does that mean? Or it could possibly also be too much group identification. I should have written that down there. So sorry that I didn't. But could also be too much group identification at the expense of self. So we're talking about balancing these things, and we're talking about integrating them into a harmonious expression while Pluto is going through that 11th house. And finally, our beautiful 12th house, Aquarian souls. Wow, the 12th house, one of the most complex houses to put in words because it represents a lot of things that are beyond words. Same with Pisces, right? Neptune also. All three of those. It's hard to describe in words. But nonetheless, I will do my best. The 12th house, the house of self-undoing. Now, I look at this in two ways. It's the places where we go to undo ties that bind, right? Things that are tripping us up. We can go to undo them consciously and work with them in some way or on the subtle body planes. And it's also the places where we are undone by typically subconscious blocks, things that we cannot see that keep tripping us up, right? So that's how I look at the 12th house of self-undoing. This has also to do, this house, with the return to oneness, right? So from the one, there were many, right? We're looking at the one zodiac wheel split into 12. 1 and 12, that's quite a significant number relationship in things like sacred geometry. So we're talking about the wanting to return to oneness, to having no separation in some way, the return to source or God or the creator, the field. This is the house of the mystical. This is the ethereal house. This is the house of dreams, of moving through different planes, right? Different dimensions, potentially. This also has to do with our unconscious cords of memory to other potentially lives or periods, connection with other souls, other things on the spiritual plane, things like that. This house also has a lot to do with channeling creative endeavors, channeling the muse, channeling God, channeling things, bringing them through your physical incarnation. This also is a house where we can be of service to the greater whole. And this also reflects back to the 6th house. Remember that Virgo house, they're the axis of service. The 12th house has to do with things that we need to give away. There will be a strong need to give something away to the collective, whether that happens to be poetry or perhaps it's, you're someone that goes through your closet, annually and gives away a lot of the things that you don't use. It could be literal, it could be metaphorical, right? This house also has to do with things that are hidden, similarly to that eighth house and that fourth house. They're private houses. They have to do with privacy. This also has to do with the water element as well. So this can be action that's happening behind the scenes, things that are hidden from view in some way. And this includes people who work against us that we can't see clearly. They're not open like they are in the seventh house. This also indicates a need to retreat from society. So you may find that you like a lot of alone time, particularly with Aquarius here, that as much as you are socially minded and want to work with others and love other people, there's also this deep need to pull back and have periods of retreat, rest, potentially isolation. Okay. So we're talking about Pluto in this 12th house in Aquarius, that air energy over that emotional water energy, that mind and emotions being blended together, transformation happening through the deep investigation of the subconscious, right? The unconscious. We could talk about also the subtle bodies here because we're talking about metamorphosis through sacred and spiritual. Perhaps sciences is a word that speaks more to Aquarius. Here, we're looking at liberation. Liberation from what? Well, from hidden aspects of the self that are sabotaging. Okay, breaking free of these things, bringing those hidden aspects up. Remember, Pluto brings things up to the surface. So this may be a very active time for you in your dream life, or again, in psychological processes in some way. This could also be in creative processes, like really being able to dig up resources that you didn't even know you had. They're coming from the ethereal planes, from these spiritual planes, from these mystic chords of memory, being able to tap into other things. Needing regeneration through retreats from society. So this could be, scheduling, like maybe it's a once a year trip for a couple of weeks. Maybe there will be the need to draw back for a longer period of time. But in either case, getting regeneration from a time away will be important during this period. And bringing your authentic gifts to the surface so that they can be given away, right? We can look at charts of many people, and this may or may not apply to you, but many people who are artists in some way or channelers in some way that have these very strong 12th house placements. You might expect them in the 10th house, right? But 12th house really making a public impact. It's not always about the 10th house or the 11th house, even. It's also about the 12th house. So, being able to do that by balancing the needs of oneness and separation. What does it mean to be a singular expression, right, of the whole? It always makes me think of Rumi and all of those just amazing, amazing poems that he shared with the world. When the wave, understanding that it's part of the ocean, that kind of thing really comes up for me here when I think about this placement in the 12th house. Understanding individuality as a facet of spirituality, right? That authenticity is also a facet of spirituality, and really diving into that and really, really getting in there and working with those types of energies, I suppose is the right word. Alchemy through dream work, through channeling, through sacred teachings, if that speaks to you. It could also be alchemy through, again, music, poetry, art, working behind the scenes in some way, maybe in a theater or in a in an art house or something of that nature. Maybe it's with photography, right? Being behind the lens of something and really experiencing through that way that's this amazing transformational energy. And then letting go of anything not self. This will be a time of definitely letting go. letting things kind of melt back into the sea of oneness, letting them dissipate. Because eventually Pluto will go over into that first house again, the house of self. So this is giving away, right? Letting go of things that are not self. And with Aquarius, we're talking also about mind, what we think we know, being able to let that be more permeable, let that go, so that when Pluto goes over that ascendant, you in a sense have a rebirth, a transformation in more of perhaps a literal way in how you are presenting yourself and working with the world and other people. So Pluto in that 12th, very powerful there. The angles. So the angles of the chart are a personal compass, and they also work in pairs. They describe major navigation points in our life through our particular chart orientation. And depending on the house system you use, the MC and the IC may or may not be on that 10th house, 4th house cusp. So if you were wondering why I didn't mention them in the 10th house, 4th house, it's because I work personally with chart systems where the MC and the IC could be anywhere between the 8th house and the 11th house for the MC, and it'd be the 5th house to the 2nd house for the IC, depending on where you were born in the world. And so I prefer to work with the MC and the IC in a floating way where they can move, because I believe it gives a lot more personal perspective on what's actually important to you, not just the 10th house, 4th house cusp by default that some house systems use. Now, you may disagree with me and you'd be like, nope, I love the 10th house, 4th house. Great, do what works best for you. But in any case, when Pluto contacts an angle, it will also contact that opposite angle. And so we're looking at the potential for major transformation and how we are oriented in our life view. So depending on the house system you use, if the MC, for example, falls in your 8th house, read Pluto in the 8th as well. That may have some extra context for you. There are certain instances where Pluto will contact all 4 of the angles, depending again on where you were born and where those angles are sitting. But it's going to transform the way in which you orient your life and your worldview. When we're talking about the ascendant and the descendant, we're talking about transformation to ourself and to our relationships. This will be a very, very strong point for typically around 3 years. It could be more than that, but Pluto can do between 1 and 5 passes over any of these angles, depending on how deeply and how long of a transformation you may need in your own particular life story. And same thing with the MC and the IC, that it could be a long period. Transformation around what we aspire to and who we are at our foundation. And again, it could be contacting all 4 of those things. It just depends on your personal chart. But these are really sensitive areas as well to pay attention to during a Pluto transit. And finally, talking about the nodes of the moon. So I'm just going to briefly go over this because there's a lot to talk about. But for those souls that have their nodal axis in Leo and Aquarius, whether it's North Node Leo, South Node Aquarius, or South Node Leo, North Node Aquarius, you're going to be getting Pluto contacts during this time in a conjunctive or opposition sense. And then if you have the nodes of your moon in Taurus and Scorpio, the other 2 fixed signs, at some point, Pluto is going to square the nodes. And in evolutionary astrology in particular, this is quite an important event. And when we're talking about the nodes of the moon, we're talking about an arc of development. Okay. So this depends on your viewpoint. For people who are comfortable with past lives, reincarnation, the nodes represent past life dynamics, past life karmic arcs that we are still moving through in this lifetime. It could be carried over from another life. It could be a change of subject from other lives. And that's kind of its own specialty area. If you're not into reincarnation, reincarnation and karmic past lives, look at the nodes more as describing the arc of your early experiences, your early traits, and then what you're developing into. Okay, so in either case, what we're talking about is the south node describing what you came into this life with, what you're really good at. What you're so good at, it's actually becoming a burden because you've gotten out of balance. And the desire, the need, the growth area is to incorporate the opposite energies of the sign in the house. Okay, so that would be the north node describing what we're developing, what we're exploring. It may feel very unfamiliar depending on your particular situation. It may be uncomfortable. Maybe like, I don't know how to do this. How does this go? Right? We want to fall back to what's comfortable, our south node. But either way, we're not looking at getting rid of the south node, right? For example, the planets right now are in, the nodes are in, excuse me, Aries and Libra. Well, the north node is in Aries, the south node is in Libra. Do you really want to get rid of relationships on a permanent basis forever? Just bye bye, chuck those out. No, maybe you do. Maybe you think you do, depending on your particular case. But in general, we're going to have to relate to other people. So it's not that we want to get rid of relating to other people, it's that we want to balance how we're doing that. We want to let go of patterns that are no longer serving us. And that's what we're talking about when we're talking about the nodal axis, in my opinion. We're not talking about getting rid of one half, because that makes no sense. But we're talking about balance, coming back to the one, coming back to that center point, that all important center point, which has its own spiritual significance, but coming back to balance. And so when Pluto is conjunct or square these nodes, it's representing a time period of intense emphasis on this particular arc that houses the signs, the subjects that we're talking about, right? And major turning points in our dynamics, in our development, and potentially major shifts and course corrections, depending on how onward path we are or offward path we are. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind here, because it's a big one coming up. And very, very last thing today, this is the call for liberation. This is really, really a time of being able to accelerate our growth and our change in ways that we truly can't even conceive of. Like by the end of this transit, we're going to be completely different people, and hopefully a completely different humanity that is more integrated, more loving, more God, it's SHIT, together, and understands true interconnection, true love and freedom, right? That is my hope. So when we're talking about Pluto, we're talking about him being your friend. And really, this is true for any planet, but because we're talking about Pluto, we're going to stick with Pluto. Pluto can be your friend and can be an asset in your life if you are willing to allow his initiatory impulses to be present in your life, if you're willing to engage with them. And I've said this in multiple videos, and I'm going to keep saying it. No one alive has experienced the transits that are coming up for us. No one. These haven't happened in hundreds of years and thousands of years. We are really at a unique time where so much is converging at once that by the end of this period, we really are going to be whole new people and society. So remember that. We are also being prepared, right? Continually prepared, continually growing for whatever challenges are coming up. Remember, astrology, like anything else in life, it builds on itself. It has a pattern and a purpose and a growth cycle within itself that we can see. And we can see it out, in the tropical zodiac, it has to do with the seasons. We can see it if we look for it. Okay. So keep adding to your tools, keep adding to your response abilities. Remember that God, the universe, the creator, knows how to balance these things far better than we ever could conceive. Okay. So no matter how much it looks like everything is falling apart, because it is, in some ways, there's so much hope here. There really, really is, if you're willing to align with it. And that is entirely up to you, right? That's your choice. So I hope this was helpful for you. I hope you learned some things about Pluto transiting the houses. And again, I hope that this gives you a sense of remembering that there's light at the end of the tunnel, that Pluto is not your enemy. Pluto is not just going to come and destroy your life willy-nilly because, he cosmically thinks it's fun. It's really something that if we understand and we can take in, Pluto can be one of the greatest assets that you ever work with in your life and one of the greatest blessings. So let me know in the comments below if this was helpful for you. And most importantly, take care. Until next time, bye.